Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources, find the core insights, and basically give you a shortcut to being well-informed. Today we're diving into something pretty heavy materials from the book Battlefield America, The War on the American People by John W. Whitehead, with a foreword by Dr. Ron Paul. Our mission here is to explore what the authors are claiming about, well, American liberty, how government and policing are changing, and some surprising ways they say our freedoms are under attack.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the book puts forward a really stark view. It basically says America is shifting towards being a police state and a surveillance state. It goes into detail about how government actions, at least in their view, are chipping away at basic constitutional freedoms. They even call it a war on the American people. So this deep dive should help you get your head around their specific arguments, the examples they use, and, maybe raise some big questions for you about society today.
Okay, let's dig into that main idea first. The authors say a lot of Americans are confused, maybe even refuse to believe it, when someone suggests America isn't really a free country anymore. So what evidence do they actually put forward right at the start to back that up?
Well, the source material points to several things that might make you pause.
Hmm.
It asks things like, would you expect the NSA to be reading your emails without a warrant? Or dealing with TSA hassles every single time you fly. They also bring up stuff like red light cameras being used in ways that might deny due process, or SWAT teams doing no-knock raids on innocent families, and police using military tactics against peaceful protesters. These are the kinds of initial examples they throw out there.
And they also point to certain moments in recent history that really push these issues into the spotlight, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Edward Snowden's leaks about NSA spying, that definitely moved the needle, shifted the public conversation more towards liberty concerns. And the events in Ferguson, Missouri, that really put police militarization right at the center of political debate in America. If you connect the dots like the authors do, they argue that having a militaristic foreign policy and a police state that abuses our civil liberties, well, those are traits of fascist systems. They even claim that only someone willfully ignorant could deny that America's foreign policy is militaristic, which, really makes you ask, how could a country supposedly built on liberty get to this point?
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting because the book dives straight into how the Bill of Rights itself is, well, under attack, according to them.
Yes, they really break it down amendment by amendment, or at least key ones. So take the First Amendment. It's supposed to protect free speech, protest, the press, religion. But they cite examples like a Marine apparently detained for criticizing the government on Facebook, or a reporter facing trouble for protecting sources, even a protester just standing silently near the Supreme Court getting arrested. Little things that add up, they argue.
Okay, what about the Second Amendment?
Right, the right to bear arms. They acknowledge it's seen as an individual right, but they claim citizens face a huge uphill battle, defending themselves against, their words, militarized, weaponized government agents. They point to court rulings saying you don't actually have the right to resist police entering your home illegally. And they suggest just owning a gun can make you a target, getting pulled over, searched, arrested, maybe even shot, while law enforcement isn't held to the same standard. They mention proposed laws, like one in Washington state for yearly home searches of gun owners, or Connecticut banning certain magazines. Even the Department of Health and Human Services wanting to link mental health treatment to gun rights, which they say has already affected about 175,000 veterans. Their core point is the Constitution was meant to be a chain on the government, a clear shackle, they say.
And the Fifth Amendment. Innocence until proven guilty, due process.
That one, they argue, has been largely extinguished. Mainly, they point the finger at the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. Specifically, the part that allows for indefinite detention of U.S. citizens, potentially without due process.
Which also impacts the Sixth Amendment right to a speedy trial, I imagine.
Exactly. They say that's another casualty of the so-called war on terror.
Yeah.
Again, because of the NDAA's indefinite detention and also the authorization for use of military force, the AUMF, they claim the AUMF has been used to justify drone strikes, killing American citizens in the absence of a court trial.
It really does sound like a steady erosion based on their account.
And just quickly, the Ninth and Tenth Amendments, the ones about rights retained by the people and powers reserved for states and people, they claim those have been turned on their head, basically made irrelevant by a powerful central federal government that thinks it's supreme, passing laws that restrict freedom, often just by saying there's an important government interest.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. One of the really striking arguments is about how local police have transformed. They say communities are becoming like military outposts. How exactly do they say this happened, this militarization?
Well, according to the source, it really kicked off back in 1997 when Congress launched the 1033 program. That's the program letting the Department of Defense give surplus military gear to state and local police. And the numbers are pretty staggering. Since then, they say more than $4.3 billion in military equipment has been handed over. We're talking assault rifles, grenade launchers, bayonets, combat knives, night vision equipment, bomb detonator robots, airplanes, helicopters, even camouflage gear. Just in 2013 alone, it was over $500 million worth.
So it's not just the gear, it's also about the mindset changing. They start acting like soldiers, not officers serving the community.
Precisely, that's the argument. The material claims police now not only look like the military, but they function like them as well.
Yeah.
And here's a really chilling line. They argue police have shifted their allegiance from the citizenry to the state. They even cited statistics suggesting Americans are 8 times more likely to die in a police confrontation than they are to be killed by a terrorist.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite a statistic. Do they give concrete examples of this kind of thing happening?
They do. The book is filled with what they call horror stories. For instance, a SWAT team in Minnesota raids the wrong house. They handcuff kids, hold the mom at gunpoint, shoot the family dog,
Oh my God.
and then made the handcuffed children sit next to the dead dog's body for over an hour. Another one, a SWAT team drives an armored vehicle, a Lenko Bearcat, onto someone's lawn, uses a flashbang grenade. The homeowner dies from asphyxiation.
Yeah.
Turned out it was a case of mistaken identity.
Unbelievable.
And the case of Andy Lopez, a 13-year-old boy carrying a toy BB gun. A deputy shot him 7 times in 10 seconds. He died. The officer apparently justified it by saying he was fearful. The source also talks about police training that actively promotes more aggression and criticizes hesitation to use force, even teaching officers how to use the law to basically get away with things, legally speaking, and that this includes viewing racial profiling as a legitimate policing technique, even for kids, pregnant women, or the elderly.
Which brings up the huge question of accountability. What do they say about that? Is there any?
They talk about this code blue camaraderie, or a sense of we-ness among police. This apparently creates an environment where, according to surveys they cite, 84% of police officers report that they've seen colleagues use excessive force. And get this, 61% admit they don't always report even serious criminal violations that involve abuse of authority by fellow officers. They also point out a really high rate of domestic violence in police families, 40%, compared to 10% in the general population, they claim.
So moving from the physical presence of militarized police, the book also talks about something maybe even more pervasive, what they call an electronic concentration camp. What kind of surveillance are we talking about here?
Oh, it's extensive, according to the source. They describe a situation where personal privacy is just vanishing. For instance, they claim federal agents use hacking techniques, getting into your computer, searching hard drives, logging keystrokes, even remotely turning on your camera and microphone.
Seriously?
That's what they allege. Then there's location tracking. License plate readers snapping upwards of 1,800 images per hour. This data identifies car owners, tracks where they've been, and gets shared between police, fusion centers, and even private companies. And they make a point that over 99% of the people being unnecessarily surveilled are entirely innocent. Cell phone tracking using stingrays gives a very precise picture of where we are and who we spend time with.
And it goes beyond just tracking, right? Into prediction and identification?
Exactly. Facial recognition software that aims to pick individuals out of crowds instantly. Companies like Raytheon developing software called Riot, get this, that supposedly promises to predict the future behavior of an individual based upon his social media posts.
Predicting behavior based on social media.
That's the claim. And then there's the NSA again.
Yeah, what more do they say about the NSA's role in all this?
Well, the source describes the NSA collecting 5 billion records on cell phone location data every single day. Every day. They allege the NSA can penetrate devices even not connected to the internet using radio waves. And they talk about a program called XKeyscore, which supposedly intercepts 1.7 billion emails, phone calls, and other types of communications each day. Just massive amounts of data. The Utah Data Center is mentioned as this huge central hub collecting basically everything you've ever said or done, stored as metadata, which can reveal who you know, where you go, what groups you're part of. Another program called Mystic, which they claim lets NSA agents listen back to up to 30 days worth of all phone calls abroad, potentially including calls involving Americans.
So with all this data collection and tracking, the line between just living your life and being under suspicion seems incredibly thin. What does that mean for freedom, practically speaking?
That's the core question they raise. They point to the FBI having nearly 12 million DNA profiles on record, and efforts to collect DNA from anyone even charged with a misdemeanor, not convicted, just charged. They mention familial search techniques using DNA to find relatives of suspects, and this push towards a pre-crime detection system going after people who might commit a crime in the future. They also bring up the historical COINTELPRO program, where the FBI targeted political groups, nonviolent ones, just based on their beliefs. The authors suggest that since the average American breaks at least 3 laws a day without knowing it, often minor things, well, if the government decided to target you for some reason, they could come up with something without much effort. So it really forces you to consider, what does freedom mean if you're potentially always one step away from being labeled a criminal?
The book doesn't stop at just surveillance and policing, does it? It also gets into psychological factors, how media might play a role in this battlefield.
Yeah, that's another interesting layer. They talk quite a bit about how fear is used as propaganda, essentially, by politicians to justify expanding government power. The idea is that emotional panic, it shuts down the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of our brain, making us more compliant.
And they single out television and electronic devices too, don't they, as ways to keep people passive?
Yes, exactly. Tools for pacification, they call it. They quote a writer, Bertram Gross, who compared old control methods like marching people around to today's electronic screen devices. Gross argued these screens are actually more effective at capturing people's attention without interfering with automobile traffic, which is kind of a funny, dark image. They cite stats like the average American watching approximately 151 hours of television per month. And they claim TV viewing triggers an addictive response, making people feel relaxed, but also slowing brainwaves down into a passive, non-resistant state. Easier to influence, harder to think critically. They draw a parallel to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, where people were happy and entertained, but had basically stopped thinking.
That term they use, societal zombification, really captures that idea. Does it apply beyond just media consumption? What about schools?
Right, zombification. They extend that idea directly to schools, describing them as microcosms of the police state, with metal detectors, surveillance cameras, militarized police, drug-sniffing dogs, tasers, cyber surveillance, random searches, all the stuff you see increasingly in schools. This environment, they argue, creates a school-to-prison pipeline. Kids getting arrested for basically being kids' nonviolent, childish behavior. They also mention the Explorers program, which trains young people in law enforcement techniques as grooming future agents of the police state. They make a very provocative comparison to the Nazi youth, even quoting Hitler saying, "Your child belongs to me already."
Wow, that's strong.
It is. It really pushes you to think about how much genuine individual thought and agency is possible when, from a young age, the environment seems designed to control and monitor.
Now, the book uses this phrase, friendly fascism. Can you unpack what they mean by that? It sounds like a contradiction.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
It comes from Bertram Gross again, the former presidential advisor. He described friendly fascism as something uniquely American. Super modern and multi-ethnic as American is Madison Avenue, executive luncheons, credit cards, and apple pie. It would be fascism with a smile. That's the quote. The authors argue that government policies often don't reflect what most Americans want, but instead cater to special interests and lobbying groups. And eventually the whole idea of consent of the governed just doesn't apply anymore. Real control passes to this oligarchic elite operating behind the scenes.
So it's not like a military coup or something obvious, it's more subtle.
Much more subtle. According to the source, it creeps slowly until it consumes the political system. They also introduced another related concept, pathocracy.
Pathocracy.
Yeah, they defined it as tyranny at the hands of a psychopathic government. A government that essentially operates against the interests of its own people except for favoring certain groups. And they list traits associated with psychopathy, lack of remorse and empathy, a sense of grandiosity, superficial charm, conning and manipulative behavior, and refusal to take responsibility for one's actions, and suggest these can apply to government systems or those in power. Which of course leads you to ask, who actually benefits if a system like that takes hold? And this idea of a pathocracy, or friendly fascism, ties directly into what they call a two-tiered system of governance.
Okay, 2 sets of rules. What kind of examples do they give to show this difference in how justice is applied?
Well, they claim flat out there's one set of laws for the government and its corporate allies, and another set for you and me. So for the average citizen, You might get SWAT teams smashing down your door, maybe invasive searches during traffic stops, phone tapping, property seized, even indefinite detention. They give examples like Brandy Burning, jailed apparently just for recording a police officer, or Nicole Gainey, arrested because her 7-year-old son was playing alone at a park nearby, or John Yates, a fisherman who got prison time for throwing back fish that were too small. Seems minor, but severe consequences.
Right. And for the other tier, the elite.
For them. Well, they argue bankers who triggered the financial crisis mostly walk free. Police officers involved in shootings of unarmed people often avoid prosecution. They mention things like strip-searching people arrested for nonviolent offenses, using tasers on pregnant women, pepper spraying peaceful protesters, actions often performed with impunity, according to the source.
So they're suggesting the rise in arrests isn't necessarily tied to more violent crime.
That's a key point they make. They state that actual violent crimes in the country is down substantially. But arrests for nonviolent crimes, things like driving with a suspended license, those are skyrocketing. And they suggest there's a profit motive behind this. Who benefits? Well, the police who arrest them, the courts which try them, the prisons which incarcerate them, and the corporations which manufacture the weapons and equipment used by police, build and run the prisons, and profit from the cheap prison labor. A whole industry built around arrests and incarceration.
They draw a historical parallel there, too, which is pretty chilling.
Extremely chilling. They state directly that it's well documented that Nazi Germany forced inmates into concentration camps, such as Auschwitz, to provide cheap labor to BAS, Bayer, Hoechst, and other major German chemical and pharmaceutical companies.
Making a direct link between corporate profit from incarceration then and now.
Yes. It really makes you question the relationship between justice and profit. If there's money to be made from arrests and imprisonment, what does that do to the system?
Okay, the authors seem to be building a case layer by layer. Do they identify any specific agency as being central to or maybe orchestrating a lot of these trends?
They do. They point specifically to the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS. They call it the mastermind, describing it as the third largest federal agency, huge budget, $61 billion, massive workforce, 240,000 full-time workers. They characterize it as completely out of control, a runaway train, a leviathan.
Wow. So how does the DHS, according to the book, actually contribute to this battlefield America scenario?
Well, several ways. They claim DHS funds military-style training drills, like one called Urban Shield. These drills are described as elaborately staged with their own set of professionally trained crisis actors playing the parts of shooters, bystanders, and victims, designed to fool not just the public, but even participating law enforcement about what's real.
Training with actors to simulate crises.
That's the allegation. They also mention DHS reports focusing on right-wing and left-wing extremism and something called Operation Vigilant Eagle that targeted military veterans. The problem, they say, is these reports define extremists very broadly, basically anyone anti-government. They also talk about terrorism liaison officers. These aren't just police. They could be firefighters, even corporate employees who are enlisted to spy on their fellow citizens, reporting suspicious activity, which could be as simple as taking pictures with no apparent aesthetic value or just espousing radical beliefs.
And the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, that's part of DHS too, right?
Yes, exactly. And the source criticizes the TSA for subjecting travelers to whole-body scanners and invasive enhanced pat-downs. Plus, now the TSA apparently searches a variety of government and private databases to track travelers even before they get to the airport. They also note something from back in 2006. DHS gave a huge contract, $385 million, to a subsidiary of Halliburton to build detention centers on American soil. The justification was for things like natural disasters or a sudden emergency influx of immigrants. But the authors clearly see this as ominous, concluding that the menace of a national police force, a literal standing army vested with massive power, cannot be overstated. It poses a serious question about accountability, doesn't it? How do you oversee an agency with such vast power, created ostensibly for security?
The book takes a final turn, almost into science fiction, talking about a post-human era. What's that about? Technology controlling us.
Yeah, it gets pretty dystopian towards the end. They argue that technology isn't just for surveillance anymore, but for actively tracking, targeting, and controlling the populace. And they explicitly say science fiction is no longer fiction. They reference The Matrix, the movie where intelligent machines have taken over and watch everyone.
So it's going beyond just being watched. It's about changing what it means to be human.
That seems to be the core fear. They talk about autonomous robots like Attilas, this 6-foot, 330-pound android developed by the Department of Defense. They note that Regina Dugan, who used to head DARPA, the military's advanced research agency focused on robotics and cutting-edge tech, later went to work for Google. A significant connection, they imply. They mention DARPA projects like Mind's Eye, which could supposedly monitor the pulse rate of specific individuals in a crowd, or the cortical processor program, aiming to mimic the human brain to create a human-machine interface.
Wow.
They claim scientists are literally trying to build a robot brain, a robo-brain, that could eventually rule over us, or at least allow androids to, funding things like a swarm challenge for drones to operate autonomously together. They bring up sci-fi concepts like a hive mind or a Borg-like society where individuality is just gone. They even cite experiments where scientists linked rats' brains, allowing direct information transfer.
Goodness. So where does this leave us? What are the ultimate implications of blending humans and machines like this?
Well, the source declares, transhumanism, the fusing of machines and people, is here to stay. No going back. They quote Bill Joy, who co-founded Sun Microsystems, giving a stark warning that humans themselves could become an endangered species. They reference discoveries like how to switch off parts of the brain linked to consciousness, and that Facebook mood manipulation study. They connected to a Department of Defense project called the Minerva Initiative, which studies things like social unrest.
So manipulating emotions for social control.
That's the implication. They push back against viewing humans as just meat machines, asking if machines can truly take on human qualities, referencing the movie Blade Runner. The ultimate fear expressed is that this transhumanist fusion may create a frightening future. One leading to, and these are strong words, the exterminism of human memory, the exterminism of human sensibility, the exterminism of individuated human intelligence, the exterminism of human morality itself. So after painting this incredibly bleak picture, the source basically throws down a challenge. It asks you, the reader, point blank, are you going to be a slave or rebel?
That's a stark choice. Given everything they've laid out, the surveillance, the militarization, the technology, what options do they actually suggest? What can someone do?
They offer what they call 10 basic principles for people who want to resist, for budding freedom fighters. First, you have to recognize the reality. We live in a secretive surveillance state with almost no real accountability or transparency. Voting alone, they suggest, just gives the illusion of participation.
Yeah, man.
Second, question everything the government does. Always remember that power corrupts. Third, they argue, materialism is a death knell to freedom. All the stuff we buy is just meant to anesthetize and distract us. Fourth, limit your reliance on electronic devices. They see them as tools designed to pacify, distract, and control you. Fifth is pretty blunt. An armed revolt will not work. The government, even local police, just has too much militarized firepower. Sixth, find power in numbers. Build networks, coalitions, and movements. Don't try to go it alone. Seventh, focus your energy locally. Action at the local level is where they believe true change can and will happen. Eighth, understand that freedom isn't just given. It arose from the hearts and minds of those who realized that they were slaves. It's an internal shift first. And finally, the choice is simple. Be a slave who just goes along with the government regime, or speak out, disagree, or even challenge the governmental policies that are destroying freedom.
And they use historical figures to kind of illustrate this path of resistance, right?
They do. Martin Luther King Jr. is a key example. His letter from Birmingham jail is held up as this powerful critique of people who just wait and see instead of challenging injustice now. They highlight King's idea that there are just and there are unjust laws, and that you have a moral duty to disobey unjust laws. An unjust law is no law at all, even if it means accepting the consequences, like going to jail. They also quote Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, on the ultimate freedom, the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way, even in the worst conditions. And King's later strategy of militant nonviolent resistance, like the Poor People's Campaign planning a shantytown in D.C., is presented as a necessary way to confront what he saw as a repressive state.
So it really boils down to a call to wake up, to see things as they really are, according to the authors.
Exactly. They use the metaphor from the movie They Live, where the main character puts on special sunglasses, the Hoffman lenses, and suddenly sees the hidden messages everywhere. Marry and reproduce, consume, obey. The idea is that most people are living in a manufactured reality, a far cry from reality, and you need those metaphorical lenses to see through the lens of truth.
Well, this has certainly been a deep dive into a very powerful and, frankly, often disturbing perspective presented in Battlefield America. It definitely forces you to grapple with some fundamental questions about authority, about technology's role, and ultimately about our own responsibility in preserving liberty.
Yeah, and what really stands out, perhaps as a final thought from the material, is this sense of urgency, the idea that the warning signs have been cautioning us for decades. Hmm. The book ends with this incredibly chilling image, comparing our situation to the unsuspecting inmates being led to the baths at Auschwitz. They heard sweet music, thought they were safe, till the doors closed and the gas came in. The source asks pointedly, and by the time we feel the hammer coming down upon us, it will be too late. So maybe the question this leaves you with is, what's the real price we pay for convenience, for distraction, when the future of our basic freedoms might actually be on the line?